And now it's time for
Matt Hunter says.
Hi, Matt Hunter here. This little episode I wanted to dedicate to a new album that I've been listening to. This is the new let me get it right side up here if I can tell which way it is. The new Dave Matthews Band album, which is called Come Tomorrow. When I first listened to it, I actually got a digital download of it while I was on an airplane, and to be honest, like when I first heard it, it didn't really have any impact on me. I thought, well, this is just kind of another Dave album. But then I got listening to it some more, and then I listened to it even more. And then stuff started to stand out to me, and I realized that this sounds different from a lot of the other stuff that they've put out, and that's not a bad thing. It's it's really good, and I'm just amazed that a band that I've listened to pretty much my whole life is still doing good stuff. I don't know how they do it, honestly, but it's really amazing. I mean, a band with six members and all kinds of different instruments going on, and it's amazing. One thing that's really different about this one is their violinist, who has been with them since the very beginning, a guy named Boyd Tinsley, has been fired. And there was some rather disturbing stuff about some sexual harassment allegations, and somebody made a funny comment on a YouTube video. They said that the fiddle dude was fiddling dudes. And I hate to hear that because I admire the guy's talent, but in the age of Me Too and all that kind of stuff, I'm sure they decided that parting ways would be best. And there are definitely some points in the album that just scream for, hey, let's get some fiddle in here. Let's, get some violin. They do add a string section to a couple of them, but it's not Boyd, and there is a void without Boyd. But other than that, Dave Matthews is a brilliant songwriter, always has been, and the band is clearly having fun with it. This little clip from their June 16th concert that actually was a promotion for the album, you really get to see the new dynamic of the Dave Matthews Band as it is now. Their replacement for Boyd Tinsley appears to be a keyboardist that they've got. His name is Buddy Strong. He's clearly enjoying it. In fact, all of these guys look like they're having fun. And that's an important part of music and anything creative. If you take a look and a listen, you'll see just that spirit of fun that I think is part of this album. Watch the smiles on these guys. Watch how Stefan Lessard, the bass player, is just totally into it, and Carter Beauford on the drums, just really grinning ear to ear the whole time. And then you've got the guys back there who were Leroy Moore's replacements. That was Sean Ross on the trumpet and Jeff Coffin on the sax. Tim Reynolds, who has been a longtime collaborator with the band, is now officially their backup guitarist, and he adds a ton of stuff to it. I think it's better than their last album. They had an album a few years ago, I think it was like in 2012. It was called Away from the World, and that didn't do anything for me. That really just was boring. I don't think they were very inspired, and I'm not sure how they could have been as a follow-up to their 2010, I guess it was, maybe it was 2009, Big Whiskey and the Groogrux King, which I actually have a copy of on vinyl. Picked that up a while back, and it sounds great on vinyl. But if you look at the artwork, I love that. That was Dave Matthews himself drew it, and it's a caricature of Leroy Moore, who was their original saxophone player, who tragically died during the making of that album. Part of what made that album so good was that they really wanted to kind of band together as a group and honor the memory of their friend and player. And that album is just killer. And I think this one is the best since that one. A lot of fans typically gravitate toward the stuff from the 90s. I have all my original CDs of their studio albums, and I have quite a few of them on a CD of the live recordings, the concert tapings that they put out. Every live show is different, and a lot of people, go and travel around the country and follow the band in live shows. I've seen them a couple times. I think they're great. I love to throw one of their concert albums on in the background sometimes and just have that going because I like the sound of it. So that they've been very prolific, but they've had about 9 or 10 true studio albums, and many people think that they're not as good as the live performances. But you know, that's a matter of opinion. Most people go to Crash. That's the one from, what year was that? 1995, I think it was. That's the one most people really like. That's the one that has So Much to Say, Crash Into Me, Two Step, Number 41, Tripping Billies on that album. That's one of their best. My personal favorite, other than Big Whiskey, is Before These Crowded Streets. This was their 1998 album, and this one is a lot darker than some of the other albums, and I think there's a different quality to it that you don't hear on any other Dave Matthews Band album. The band and particularly Dave were at the time unhappy with their producer, who actually ended up doing a great job, but they weren't getting along particularly well, and it just wasn't working for them. But in a way, I think that made them better, because I think the tension between them ended up making a pretty good album. I'd equate that to being like the Beatles during Abbey Road and Let It Be, when they were all toward the end of their careers with the Beatles and they weren't getting along. I think those are some of the best albums, those final albums that the Beatles ever put out. So maybe a little bit of discord is a good thing, but that's just my opinion. So is this album as good as that album, or as good as Big Whiskey? Well, no, it's not. But it's different in tone from each of those. It doesn't have the dark tone of Before These Crowded Streets, and it also is a lot more upbeat and less intense than Big Whiskey. So it's kind of a just laid back band having fun album, and it had multiple producers and was recorded over a long period of time. Some of these album tracks actually date back to 2006 or so. There's only one track where you actually hear Boyd Tinsley and Leroy Moore. They're kind of hard to edit out, but the rest of it is some of it was recorded like 2 or 3 years ago, and then some of it was recorded just specifically for this album. So the songs are all kind of different, but the overall tone, the overall theme is songs about childhood and songs about the current state of affairs, and then songs about the future. But it doesn't get political. It doesn't mention anything regarding the current climate of our society, really. It's just like, for example, Samurai Cop, the opener. It's Samurai Cop, Oh Joy Begin. That song is about the birth of a child, and it's a beautiful song. And I think a lot of people who grew up listening to Dave and the band will like, because now they're having kids of their own. Then there's my favorite on the album that I showed that clip from is called, let's see, that one is called Do You Remember? I love this song. Do you remember when we were small? There was gold in the river and ghosts in the attic. Don't go up there alone. The enemy's coming. We will take cover. The odds are against us. That sounds kind of dark, but it's actually this really upbeat song. That's my favorite on the album. Idea of You is also a good one. That's the old one that I was telling you about that they kind of polished up and put on here. But anyway, overall, yeah, it's not as good as Big Whiskey or as good as Before These Crowded Streets, but it's certainly better than Away from the World. It's better than Stand Up, which was the one they did back in like '06 or so, that was like kind of a hip hop album that didn't really work very well. So it's solid. I like it, and I think everybody else will too. And I've talked long enough, so I'm going to shut up. But thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and tune in next time, folks.